I have to confess, when I first chose this subject from the list on the board sometime last year, I thought it'd be quite an easy study really, because everybody knows about David and Goliath, don't they? We taught it at Sunday school, and even people that perhaps don't know much about the Bible will be able to tell a little bit about David and Goliath. So I thought that's an easy subject, I'll pick that. But once I started looking into it, I found that it's absolutely packed with study. Too much really. So there may be things I've left out, there may be other ways of looking at it. But what I've tried to do this evening is to go a little deeper than the Sunday school lesson and perhaps look at less obvious aspects of this account. Mainly concentrating on the fact that the Philistines represent everything human. Man's views and ideas, his arrogance, his self-confidence in power and might, and his attitude towards God. Whereas David represents things pertaining to God. And we'd also pick out some of the many types and shadows along the way that point towards Christ in David and his actions. But first of all, let's begin by looking actually where the two armies met each other. I find this quite interesting really. Some of the names are difficult to pronounce. So we'll look at where the Philistines were. Verse 1 tells us, now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Sokar, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Sokar and Azekah in Ephaz-Damnim. And you might think, just read that and forget it. But actually, when you look at the names, it's very interesting that they chose to pitch their camp there. Because Succoth means a place of protection or safety. So a place that was quite easy to defend. It was relatively a good place to put your army. And Askar means help or support. So you get the idea already. That if they knew the meaning of these names, they'd think, well, this is a good place because it's a place of safety and a place of support. So we're on pretty good ground here. Unfortunately, if they'd have looked at the name of the valley, they would have seen that it actually means an area or a field of blood, which is not so good, is it, for them? And if we quickly turn to Matthew chapter 27, we know where I'm going. Matthew chapter 27, we find another field of blood, don't we? Matthew 27 verse 8. This is, we're going to verse 3. Then Judas, which betrayed Jesus, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. And the chief priest took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful for us to put them into the treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they took counsel and brought with them the potter's field to bury strangers. Wherefore that field was called the field of blood unto this day. So it's a similar thing, isn't it? There's maybe an association with that valley, something to do with blood in the history. We don't know, but it wasn't a good place to be. So although initially they picked a good place, the actual place where the battle would happen was not such a good place. And Israel pitched at Elah, which means place of the oak or a place of strength. You could say they pitched under the strength of God. So this valley then was going to be a place of decision, wasn't it? There was going to be an outcome to this battle. And the Philistines were convinced they would win. Israel was not so sure what the outcome would be. Joel chapter 3 verse 12 to 14 talks about another valley of decision. It says, let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get ye down, for the press is full, the vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitude in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. And that's what happened to the Philistines in the end. The sickle was put in, and they were sheaved like wheat, weren't they? So it was very much a valley of decision. It's also very appropriate, actually, that this year the world is concentrating on the centenary of the anniversary of the First World War. And most people, when they think of the First World War, tend to concentrate on the Western Front, don't they? And everybody, most of you will know that in some places the Allied trenches and the German trenches were so close to each other that the two sides could actually talk to each other without really raising their voices. Sometimes only half a dozen yards apart they could speak to each other. Now, researchers tell us that this valley was a similar sort of place. When the armies came down and filled the valley, they would be extremely close to each other. The acoustics as well apparently would be very good in this valley. It's still there. And they wouldn't really have to shout very much to hear each other because of the acoustics, because of the relatively short distance apart they were from each other, a bit like the trenches in the Western Front. Nobody would have any trouble hearing what the enemy was saying. So someone like Goliath, who came forward even further, there'd be no mistaking what he was saying. It would be clear and ring out like a bell, really, as they faced each other on the valley floor. So back to 1 Samuel 17 and verse 4. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in the span, and he had a helmet of brass upon his head. Now, that used to fascinate me when I was a little boy. It would be like, he was a giant of a man. You can understand why everybody was terrified with him. I don't know what the height of this room is. It's probably less than 9'9", but he was a huge man. His mail coat, for example, that he wore, his coat of mail, weighed approximately 8 stone. That's like carrying an 8-stone person around on your shoulders. That's how strong he was. He could move around with an 8-stone mail coat on his shoulders and carrying a spear like a weaver's beam with a head weighing almost a stone on the end of it. So imagine what damage that would do. We know about him. He had a shield bearer that carried his shield until he needed it. We're also told that this man would deflect as much as he could any missiles from the enemy. But to me, the thing that stands out most about Goliath is the total arrogance of the man, his total self-confidence in his own strength, his own power, so much so that he felt he could make this grand promise on behalf of the rest of the Philistines that if I lose, we'll be your servants. Because it never entered his head in the slightest that there was even the minuscule chance that he would lose any fight. That's how confident and arrogant he was. And of course that would project itself to the Israelites, didn't it? He could do what he said. He was like I suppose like the equivalent of a human tank, really, fully armoured, several weapons that he was an expert with. There was no way that you'd be able to beat that man. And to me, again, he represents man's attitude to God today. Man has endless knowledge. They say we've developed amazing communication networks. In point of fact, we swept God aside and we're safe in our own power. Now, we don't need God anymore if he even existed in the first place. Our God is science and materialism, and our churches are shopping malls. And we can mock this God that's supposed to exist without any fear of retribution now. And that's generally what a lot of people's attitude towards God is. They dismiss him, they put him out of their thoughts, very confident in themselves or other people. And in fact, like the Philistines, people who trusted in Goliath, people trust in other people, don't they? They believe without question what scientists tell them, for example, evolution. And it never occurs to the majority of the population that, like Goliath, they might be actually, when it comes to it, absolutely and utterly wrong. It never enters their head, really. So that's what Goliath represents to me. For all his armour, all his strength, he represents man's attitude towards God. Verse 15, it says, "But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem." And here's a type of Jesus here. What was Jesus' ministry? It wasn't it? It was to go and feed the sheep of his father. So that's what David was doing. He was a type and a shadow of Jesus in this sense, that he was a shepherd for his father. He looked after his father's sheep. We'll come back to that in a moment. He was feeding his father's sheep. He was caring for his father's sheep. And that was his ministry at that time, just like Jesus. And in verse 16, the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. And that jumped out at me. It's interesting, it's 40 days. Jesus was in the wilderness, wasn't he? Being taunted by the devil for 40 days. Here's Israel being taunted by the devil, if you like, by Goliath, for 40 days. It can't be just a coincidence, can it, brothers and sisters? There's some meaning behind that, the 40 days. Very, very similar. So here we have the situation then that Israel are afraid of Goliath. Goliath goes out, taunts them, defies God, and nobody does anything about it. The person that should have done something, of course, was Saul, because he was a man for the job. He was, head and shoulders above everybody else in the army, and whilst he wouldn't have been as tall as Goliath, the difference wouldn't have been so great, would it? But even Saul was afraid of this man. Verse 20 then. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. It's interesting there that David actually left the sheep to go out to help God's people, didn't it? To go out and try and rescue the army. And again, there's a type and shadow of Jesus. Jesus gave a parable, didn't he? Saying, a good shepherd will leave the 99 sheep behind in safety and go out and help and rescue the one, or in this case the army, the one that are struggling, they're in danger. And again, there's a type and shadow of Jesus there. It's very vague, but it's there, isn't it? Doing what Jesus would have done. And we have this debate going on here. And it's also interesting as well that he got up early in the morning like Jesus did. He didn't leave it till a bit later. He went out first thing to do this because he knew it was important to his father. So off he went early in the morning, like Jesus rose up early in the morning. Verse 25, I know I'm missing some verses out here, but we're very familiar with it. He makes sure, of course, that the rest of the sheep are okay. He leaves them with the keeper. Verse 23, verse 25. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel he is come up, and it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with three things here. Great riches. He will give him his daughter, and he will make his father's house free in Israel. And as Richard's version said, they'll be exempt from taxes. Also, if it were me, that would be the one that I would really like, being exempt from taxes. Never mind the other two. But it was a massive incentive, and still nobody had taken it up, had they? Because they doubted themselves. But what's the significance of it? Is there any significance? Well, this is my thoughts on it. Again, it's types and shadows. The great riches, okay? Great riches in the Bible could be the kingdom of God, couldn't it? The kingdom when it comes. Because we're told to seek ye first the kingdom of God. That's the first thing we should be looking for, and it's first in the list. It's a great riches to have, isn't it? Be part of the kingdom. So maybe it could be a type of the kingdom. The daughter, bride of Christ, perhaps, and taxes. Okay, taxes are we're all in bondage of taxes, aren't they? Taxes maybe could represent the bondage of sin, because the wages of sin is death. So it could be something along the lines of that, something rather than just what's on the page there. The kingdom, bride of Christ, and freedom from sin and death. And Jesus, of course, met all those. He defeated death, didn't he, on the cross? And he has or will soon have all three of those rewards. So again, in the background, there's types and shadows all through it. There were too many for me to look at in one evening, really. But they phase in and out, these types and shadows of Christ in David's actions in this account. There's just a few of them I'm picking out, really. Now, verse 28, unfortunately, things turn a little bit sour. And Eliab, his elder brother, heard when David spake unto the men, and his anger was kindled against David, and said, why comest thou down hither And with whom hast thou left the few sheep in the wilderness? So he's inferring now that David had just let them wander off. Of course he hadn't. I know thy pride and thy naughtiness of thine heart. I love that expression, naughtiness of thine heart. For thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. You're here just to gawp. You know, got this morbid thing about battles. And David's quite upset about that. He says, you know, I can't do anything right for you, can I? Whatever I say or do, I'm wrong. And again, we have here type and shadow. This is nothing new, is it? If we go right back to Genesis 37, we've come across this before. Genesis 37. Arguments and jealousy between brothers. Genesis 37, we just pull out a few verses. Verse 2. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17-year-old, was feeding the flock. Oh, there it is again. Feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bela and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought him unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colours. Okay, verse 4. And his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren. They hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. They were jealous. You get that impression that his brothers were jealous of David, maybe because of his good looks, his ability to play, I don't know, but they were jealous of him really, weren't they? Verse 14. And when he said unto them, Go, I pray thee, see whether it will be well with thy brethren. It's like Jesse said to David, isn't it? Go and pray thee, see whether there be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him to the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem. Okay, and what do they say when they see him coming? They don't throw their arms around him, say, he's our little brother. They say, behold, this dreamer cometh. Okay, his head's in the clouds. So it's nothing new. Now, if we take it forward into Mark chapter 3, we find it again, don't we? Oops. Mark chapter 3. Verse 20, connection there. And the multitude cometh together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread. And when Jesus' friends heard of it, they went out to lay hold of him, for they said, he is beside himself. Friend's not a very good translation. It should actually read close family. So his family, Jesus' own family, his brothers and even his sisters said, you know, he's lost his mind. So again, all three of these men doing God's work, being shepherds to God's people, everybody thought they were crazy or they were jealous of them. So David was in good company in that respect, I suppose, really, we could say. Back to 1 Samuel 17. Then we go to verse 33. Verse 32. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of Goliath. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go out against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. So Saul's attitude really was more like the Philistines than a man of God, because he looked at David, he said, you've got no chance, sunshine. You know, you're just a youth, you're not trained, you're not a warrior. Now, we hit a bit of a problem here, which we'll look at in more detail later, because why didn't Saul recognise David? Okay, if you go back to chapter 16, it tells you about when David goes and plays the harp for Saul, and he stays with him for a certain, quite an amount of time really, playing and soothing him. And it says that Saul liked David an awful lot. He got very fond of him. But the verse we're going to look at just now is in verse 18. Verse 17. And Saul said unto his servants, provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants, and said, behold, I have seen the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite. So he tells him who his father is. That is a cunning player, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war. So the servant said, I know a young lad, okay, or a youth. He's a good harp player, but he's a warrior. He's a man of war. He knows how to fight. And Saul seems to have forgotten that. He doesn't seem to recognise David, and he says, you're not a warrior. Well, he was told plainly to his face that here is a man who's a warrior. So we'll come back to that in a minute. It's a bit of a problem, that, if you can make too much of it. But it's strange, isn't it? So back to chapter 17 and verse 34. And David said unto Saul, thy servant keepeth his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear, and took the lamb out of the flock. And I went after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing as he defiled the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. And then Saul says, go in peace. So why did David go at such lengths to tell him about the bear and the lion? Okay, and he said, I'll defeat this Philistine as well. In a little while we'll look at what actually Goliath, God considered Goliath to be. But there is some significance in the examples of a bear and a lion here. If we go to 1 Peter chapter 5, nothing is put in Scripture just for no reason, is it? There's always a reason why something is said. So 1 Peter chapter 5. And just look at a couple of verses. Verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. So the lion here represents your adversary. Okay, those are against you. Go to 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 17. Just another one verse. Notwithstanding the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, that by me the preaching might be fully known, and that all the Gentiles might hear. And I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion. Because that's Paul writing there saying, God took me out of the mouth of the lion. He took me out of the mouth of my adversary. My adversary had me in its grip near death, but God took me out, like David rescued his lamb. So the lion then represents the animal that circles its prey. It's always circling, looking for an opportunity to strike and bring you down. That's how lions work. They often work in packs as well, don't they? You know, that they wear their prey down. They run it into the ground, then they attack. Well, that's like people in the world, isn't it? They'll wear you down, that circle, looking for an opportunity. And David had not only had killed lions like that, but no doubt he'd come up against people that had tried to trap him in the things of God as well. And a bear will often lie in wait, in cover. It'll hide, and then suddenly it'll roar out and catch you unaware. It's the same thing, it'll spring out on you. There are people like that, aren't there? Your adversary could be like that. He'll bide his time, he'll hide. He might seem awfully nice or be kind, but then bang, like a bear, he'll strike you down. And bears usually hit you and knock you to the ground. They don't drag you down, they hit you. They strike you down. So there's some significance there, isn't there? That David's not only saying, I've killed these creatures, but I've dealt with people like that as well, and he would have done, wouldn't he? So let's go back to 1 Samuel then, 17, and verse 38. And we're very familiar with this, aren't we? And Saul armed David with his armour, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head, and he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armour, and he essayed to go, for it had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. Now, what we tend to, in most pictures of David and Goliath, in books or wherever you look, David's normally portrayed as quite a slim youth, isn't he? Quite young, not excessively tall, and Goliath is as Goliath is. That's not right, is it, if you read that verse? Because David was tall enough and strong enough to wear Saul's armour. And we know Saul was at least over 6 foot tall, so David must have been approximately 6 foot or maybe more tall. So he wasn't a skinny stripling of a lad, he was a big, strong man. That's a point we need to remember. He wouldn't have looked much different from Saul, I don't think, in build and size, because he could carry the weight of the armour. But of course it just constricted him, didn't it? He's not used to it. It would have hampered him. He was used to moving freely, moving fast, light on his feet, able to dodge, able to run, always on the go. That's how he fought. So he put the armour off, and that must have caused some consternation for Saul and Israel. What's he doing? Has he lost his mind? He's beside himself. He's taking the armour off. What on earth is he doing? That's his only chance of surviving, but he's throwing it away. But he wasn't afraid, was he? In verse 36, he wasn't afraid, because he's already said that I will destroy this Philistine. So he had absolute confidence that with God's help he could do this. Okay, and the words are echoed in Psalm 20, if we quickly turn to Psalm 20. And verses 7 to 9. So here he is, he's getting ready for the battle now. Psalm 20, verses 7 to 9. Because he wasn't like Goliath, was he? Because Goliath and the Philistines and even some of the Israelites trusted in chariots and some in horses. But David could say, I will remember the name of the Lord. They are brought down and are fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. Save, Lord, let the King hear us when we call, or let the King hear me when I call. So he says, no good trusting in chariots, and the enemy will be brought down without all that. But of course David had great spiritual insight, didn't he? Although he appeared to be just wearing a shepherd's tunic and sandals and that's it, he was in fact, of course, clad in armour, wasn't he? He was armoured exactly the same, or probably more strongly, than Goliath. Because if we go to Ephesians chapter 6, we're told, aren't we, that we should put on the armour of God. It's not something you can see. It's not something that people that ungodly people know about. So Ephesians chapter 6, and we'll just look at verses 10 to 11. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might, not your own arm. Put on the whole armour of God, that ye may be able to stand who? You may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And Goliath would no doubt be a very wily person. He knew all the tricks. Okay, he'd catch you out, he'd circle you, he knew exactly what he was doing. He's a very wily devil, very wily adversary, Goliath. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's exactly what Goliath was, isn't it? All these things. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand the evil day. And it was certainly David's evil day, wasn't it? And having done all, to stand. And then it goes on to tell you to quench the fiery darts, etc., etc. So David had absolute confidence in the armour of God. He didn't need anything else. In fact, it would have been more of a hindrance to, wouldn't it? So there we have it. Verse 42 then, back to Samuel 17, which I've now lost. Samuel 17. And I said we'd be just jumping in and out little things. 1 Samuel 17 and verse 42. And here we are, we're back with Goliath now. When the Goliath looked about and saw David, now I get the impression here, because he was so tall, he was probably going, oh, where is he then? Where's this champion? Oh, there he is down there. Okay, that sort of mocking, so, oh, he's so small, I can't see him. Oh, there he is down there. So he had a good look round. All show, of course. And he saw David, he disdained him for his but a youth and ruddy, and exactly what Saul said, wasn't it, really? Now, this must have taken him back a bit, because he got a bit cross then, because he thought they were mocking him. And he said to David, am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? You know, is that what you think of me? You know, he's probably a bit upset that David wasn't appearing scared of him as well, I would imagine. Expected David to be sort of looking really frightened, but of course David wouldn't. So he says, am I a dog that you come out? Now, of course, Goliath, it was totally beyond Goliath to see what was really before him. He just looked with his eyes. He couldn't see the armour of God that David was wearing. It was completely hidden from him. It'd be interesting to see if his eyes were opened and he could see what David was actually wearing. I think he's lost some of his arrogance. And if his eyes were opened and he saw David wearing the armour of God, a lot of his arrogance and confidence would have gone, I think. Same with most worldly people, isn't it? They've got limited sight. They cannot or will not see the things of God. All he saw was a simple shepherd boy armed with basic weapons. And we're told this, aren't we, in 1 Corinthians. Shouldn't be surprised at his attitude, really. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verses 27 to 29. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world, or the simple things of the world, to confound the wise. And God hath chosen the weak things of the world. And doubtless Saul thought, look at that puny little chap there, you know, weak thing of the world, to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised. It actually says that Goliath despised David, doesn't it? Hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. So that's the world's attitude, same as Goliath's, isn't it? And, it's too simple, it's too easy. This is, I can't see anything. So he had a worldly attitude, and he also jeers at him, doesn't he? He asks him a question. You know, do you think I'm a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the simple answer to this, when I've looked into it, is yes, you are a dog, Goliath. That's exactly what you are. Because Goliath is described with amazing accuracy in several places in Scripture. Let's go and have a look. Exodus chapter 11. Bear in mind what Goliath had been doing for 40 days. Exodus chapter 11. 40 days and 40 nights been coming down, insulting, jeering at God, shouting, strutting about. Exodus chapter 11, and just look at verse 7. But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that ye may know how that the Lord doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. So God says, I won't allow a dog to speak against Israel. What was Goliath doing? He was a dog speaking against Israel. Okay, he was barking out, wasn't he, like a dog does. And in God's ears it was just bap, 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 like that. Okay, Psalm 59. Another example. Psalm 59 and verses 5 to 8. Thou therefore, O Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, awake to visit all the heathen. Do not be merciful to any wicked transgressors, Goliath. They return at evening, and they make a noise like a dog, and go round about the city. Behold, they belch out with their mouths, swords in their lips, for whom, say they, doth hear. But thou, O Lord, shalt laugh at them. Thou shalt have all the heathen vision. That's exactly what Goliath did. He marched about, he barked. What did he say? He says, who's here? Your God won't hear. He was a dog, wasn't he? Very much fitting the bill. This was Goliath. So in God's eyes, then, Goliath was no more than a stray dog. No, he wasn't even a bear or a lion. He was just a stray dog. That's what God thought about him. And verse 43, he sneers at David, and then he sneers at his weapons, doesn't he? Because that's how his mind worked. He says, do you come at me with staves or sticks? But he missed the sling, didn't he? It's interesting. He didn't see David's sling. He just saw the stick. He thought he just got a stick with him. That was a big mistake. Now, stave in Strong's 4731 only occurs twice more in the Bible. Zechariah 11 verse 7 is one. Turn that up. And this meaning of the word only occurs a couple of times. Zechariah 11 verse 7. And I will feed the flock of slaughter, even you, O poor of the flock. And I took unto me 2 staves, the same word, the one I called beauty, and the other I called bands, and I fed the flock. And the word here means a branch or a stem from out of which things would bud, things would grow, something would develop. It's interesting, right, isn't it? Because where does your mind go to? Aaron's rod, Isaiah 11. And that's what it means. He carried a staff, and the meaning of that, the staff that he carried, was it would bud, something would come out of it. And where did Jesus come? Out of the rod and staff. Jesse, didn't he? That's very interesting, I think that is. And Psalm 23 verse 4, just to see how position David was in. Psalm 23 verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Okay, so David could say, I'm actually, literally, virtually, I am going into the valley of the shadow of death. Because what did Goliath represent? He represented death, didn't he? Almost certain death. So David could say, although I'm going to this valley of the shadow of death, and it could be, I doubt he got that close, though, you know, Goliath's shadow may have come over him. He said, I've got your staff with me, so I'm not afraid. Now, David's sling then, a very, very deadly weapon, this. I don't know, any of you were here when Brother Peter Hill talked about it. He told us that it could go 80 miles an hour, the missile, over 200 to 400 metres. That's amazing. It's like a rifle, isn't it? 80 miles an hour. Okay. Judges chapter 20, verse 16. I'll read that for you if you like. Judges 20 verse 16 tells us a bit about these weapons. And behold, the children of Benjamin, we know this, were numbered at that time out of the city 26,000 men that drew sword, blah blah blah. Among them, all these people, there were 700 chosen left-handed men. Everyone could sling stones at an hair's breadth and not miss. I love that. They're good to fly on the wall, if you like, with these stones going at 80 miles an hour. And they're still used today. Again, absolutely amazing. I was looking through the paper at Jen's cousin's house the other day, and there was a bit about rioters in Kiev fighting fighting in the streets and against armed soldiers. You won't be able to see this, but it actually a picture. It says slingshot. A rioter hurls stones at the police, and he's using exactly the sling that David would have used. There you can have a look at it afterwards. And they didn't throw them overhand, they whipped them up and then threw them up into the air to gather speed. Okay, if you'd done it overhand, you start to lose speed. They threw them under, they wound it up, released it, and it would go up, building speed as it went up. Now, it says that David picked up 5 stones. We're not going to go into the reasons he picked up 5 stones. That's been worked to death, really. 5 brothers. I think it's probably so he didn't have to fiddle around trying to find one little stone in the bottom of his bag, but there we are. He wouldn't have had time to do that. He needed to move fast. He was running as well, wasn't he, towards Goliath. So it says stones, pebbles. It wasn't like that at all. I looked this up, quite a bit of research on this. This missile would have been going 80 miles an hour. It could hit you at 400 metres, which is quite scary, really. Very accurate. I'm told these missiles actually ranged in size from this to this. So you imagine being hit by a stone cricket ball going 80 miles an hour. That'll damage, okay, if used properly. So the stone that hit Goliath would be somewhere about that size. Not a tiddly little pebble out there, something like that, going 80 miles an hour. Now the Philistine soldiers wore helmets that had a band across the forehead and down the temples, exactly to try and counter that, very much like a Roman soldier. I've seen a video that actually says, could David, they tested the theory, could David bring down Goliath with a stone, heavily armoured like that? And they showed what happened when a stone the size of an egg hit, I can't remember how thick the metal was, but it it didn't actually go through, but it punctured it right into somebody's head. So it would have certainly fractured his skull. He aimed for the temple, David, and brought him down. So absolutely possible. There's no doubt about it. Even if he was armoured, it would have penetrated that and brought him down. Devastating. But again, we shouldn't really be surprised at this, really, because there's types and shadows in the Bible, aren't there? We're told that, let's go to Genesis 3. If Goliath represents evil and death, Genesis 3 verse 15 tells us that, doesn't it? This will be the outcome. Genesis 3 verse 15. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So here's again a type and a shadow. It did more than bruise Goliath's head, didn't it? It fractured his skull, caused huge concussion, and made him crash down to the floor. I wonder where his shield bearer had gone by while this was going on, by the way. It doesn't say, does it? Probably legged it by then. So there we have it. And of course, if we cast our minds to Daniel's image, what was it that brought that image down? It was a stone, wasn't it? A simple stone that hit it at speed and brought it down. So we shouldn't be surprised that David was able to do that at all. Verse 51, then back in Samuel 17. So, therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head. That would have taken some doing. It's not easy to cut somebody's head off as well. It says how strong he was. So he used Goliath's own sword, which is a bit makes you smile, really, isn't it? But it also shows you what Goliath thought of David. He didn't even bother to draw his sword. I think he thought, I could take this chap out just with a spear. I don't need to bother about using my sword. I'll leave it where it is. I'll just bring him down. One good throw, my javelin, or my spear. He had two weapons to do that. I don't need my sword. I'll leave it where it is. So again, it didn't go well for him, did it? But here we see, of course, that God's power, his heel, David's heel, was down on Goliath, as we saw in Genesis 3. So again, types and shadows. And surprise, surprise, did the Philistines keep their promise? Of course they didn't. As soon as they saw that Goliath had gone, they were off. They weren't going to stand around and see. It must have been a huge shock for them, though, mustn't it? And for Israel as well, I suppose. But more for the Philistines. They broke their oath and fled. And again, don't put your trust in princes and the sons of man. They'll break their promises to you, just like the Philistines did. Now, we mentioned earlier that there is a problem in this chapter, and we'll look at the last few verses, verse 55. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of his army, "Whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As thy soul liveth, Lord, I cannot tell." And the king said, "Inquire whose son the stripling is." And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, and the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son art thou, thou young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of the servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." Now, there is a problem here, because as I said earlier, why didn't Saul recognise David? Okay, he might not remember who his father was, okay, but he'd think he'd have recognised him. And he said, "I'm David." He thought, "Oh yes, okay." So there is a problem, and I've read a few books on this, and his brother, I can't remember his name now, Brother Roy Stanley, in the book Warrior Tamed, gives quite a good explanation of this. I'd worked out some of it myself. Well, my opinion was this before I read the book, but this is what could be the answer to this. There's no need to get too worried about it, really. It doesn't alter the account. But what we must remember, first of all, that in verse 16, Saul was acutely unwell mentally. His mind was not there. His mind had gone, more or less. Okay, he flitted from being calm, quiet, to absolute in a rage, with no control, no insight, not knowing where he was. And whilst we're told he liked David a lot, it could have been in the sense that he liked the person that could calm him. He liked the music. He liked the fact that this person could soothe his mind, so he kept him there. We're told that David became his armour bearer. Now, armour bearer is a general term. It means, first of all, what it says, someone that cares for and looks after a soldier's armour, or carries a shield like Goliath's armour bearer did. But it can also mean, in a general sense, a trusted servant, a trusted member of the household. It needn't be an intimate relationship. And of course, we're not told how often these periods of insanity came to Saul. There might have been long periods where he was relatively okay. He didn't need David and therefore never saw him. And also, as I said earlier, there is no indication of the period of time between chapters 16 and 17. So how long had passed between those chapters, we don't know. But you've got the address right. But the best way to look at it is we've got the address, sorry, please your plan here, 2014. A picture of 2013, a lot of people on there, youngsters. If you went back the year before, or 2 years back, or 3 years back, and looked at those youngsters, there'd be a huge difference, wouldn't there, between them. They grow taller, their faces change. So it's possible that because of what was going on in his life, that Saul didn't know who David was. He didn't recognise him. He'd forgotten that he'd been told that he was just his son. So don't worry too much about that anomaly there. So in conclusion then, we see here, and it's very famous and very exciting, it is an exciting account, that David's defeat of Goliath is a message to those who will listen, that man's power and his skill and his knowledge and his arrogance are useless against a simple message of the gospel, and that with faith we can overcome things that in human views are impossible.